Hey everyone, what's going on? James Daniel here, helping you make buying a home in San Pedro California simple. And today we're going to go over a topic that has been making waves in the real estate industry pretty much this entire year. This would be the NAR settlement, or the National Association of Realtors settlement. This is going to be big, especially for you guys that are trying to buy a home in this market. A lot of things have changed from where they were at and done traditionally. So in this video, I hope to talk a little bit about the settlement, how things were done traditionally for those of you who are new and just don't really know how things were done traditionally versus how they're going to be done moving forward, and then some scenarios that you might see yourself in this new environment. So if you guys are like, hey James, like slow down, like slow down. What is the NAR settlement? What's going on here? So this is basically an antitrust lawsuit that will change the way commissions are handled in real estate moving forward, and how they were done pretty much traditionally. So with this lawsuit, it basically argues that commissions from the seller side brokers and the buying side brokerage weren't very transparent, or compensations weren't very transparent. So with this new $418 million settlement, this is set to change the way the real estate world will operate moving forward. So let's go ahead and get into it. So let's start off with talking about how this went down traditionally before this settlement. So a listing agent would go to a seller's house and they would have their presentation. You know, everyone has their different ways of doing this. But some point in that conversation would come up to a piece of compensation for the amount of value that that agent is bringing to the table to help sell their home. And a portion in that conversation, a portion of that compensation would be given to a buyer's agent to be able to entice them to bring in a good buyer. So on the residential listing agreement, you would have, hey, you know, my total compensation for the value that I bring was X%. And then another percentage of that, whatever you guys agree on, would be put on that contract. So, you know, for the buyer's agreement. So for example, say for instance, you know, I'm having a conversation with the seller. They're talking about my compensation and, you know, what I'm doing to help them sell their house. And that's 5%. And then I'm telling them that, you know, I'm using 2.5% of that to be able to bring in a buyer's agent to be able to bring in a good buyer to help you sell your home. After that, I would go on the MLS, set the home on the MLS, and included in there would be the portion of compensation that I'm going to give to that buyer's agent. So on the other side, you know, the buyer's agent has a buyer and they're going around and looking at houses with this buyer, and hopefully before that they've had some type of buyer consultation to be able to see what their wants and needs are and kind of break down where they want to look for a house, what their budget is, and things like that. And then they would take them out to go look for houses. There was a buyer broker agreement. It wasn't mandated. You know, I think, you know, some people I've heard have used it, some people haven't. I have used it in the past. I have not used it in the past. So I have, you know, sometimes have, sometimes haven't. But then when you find a house, you would then, you know, put in, you see what the compensation is, and then you would get that compensation after you help that buyer close the house. In those conversations, you know, I always still talk to the buyers and told them, hey, you know, my compensation to helping you is X%, you know, but in this market or in this area, usually the seller will pay for my compensation. You know, kind of had a conversation to them about that, letting them know, you know, what the value is, how much I charge for my value. The majority of the time in this market, this is how this will work out. So now let's fast forward to today. So if I am a listing agent and I'm going to have a presentation with the seller, I go through everything and I talk to them all about it. And the topic of conversation comes, I provide my value, and the topic of conversation comes at some point in that conversation. So say for instance, using the same number in the last scenario, that 2.5% was used. So I'm saying, hey, I'm bringing value. Here's what I'm going to help you sell your house. Here's a plan. My compensation for the value that I'm bringing is 2.5%. And on this new residential listing agreement, you're going to put that 2.5% down in the contract. And there is nowhere for what the buyer is getting paid. What I've seen so far, when I'm doing open houses or in my office, you know, people have communicated via phone, people have written it down on a flyer that's in the house already. You could have via text or whatever that is, but this number will not be in the MLS anymore. So you cannot see, you're gonna have to call and pretty much negotiate with you what their commission is going to be, or maybe you already have, the seller has agreed upon giving a compensation to a buyer's agreement for a certain whatever that might be, whatever number that might be. So from the buyer side, I would plan on having a buyer's consultation with my buyers. We go through, how I can help them, get to know a little bit about what their wants and needs are, break down what they have for budget. But we're also talking about this scenario. And from now moving forward, each buyer will have to sign a buyer's broker agreement, where on that agreement establishes, using the same numbers with the past, I'm working with this buyer and telling them like, hey, this is the value that I'm going to bring in finding you your house. My charge for my value is 2.5%. If a seller offers a compensation as of 2.5%, then hey, we're okay. You don't owe me anything. But there could be a scenario in the future where a seller does not pay for my, compensation. So that is going to have to be covered by you. And we'll talk about some more scenarios and some different things like that of how this is going to happen in the future. But this is kind of the conversation that needs to be open and transparent with a buyer, because you don't want any surprises later after that. And now this buyer representation and broker compensation agreement, was not mandatory in the past, and now it is. You need to have this before you go out and show your buyers' houses. I think this is definitely huge. It definitely changed the mindset of buyers going in, knowing that potentially they could have to pay all of or some of a portion of their buyer agent's commission, which historically didn't really happen. Even though that conversation should have still gone up with them about this, it didn't really happen in the past. Usually whatever that buyer or seller was offering, that buyer's agent would take, and that was that. So definitely a lot of changes coming about. So I really want to go into now some potential scenarios of what I think might happen or what I've heard about happening. I've talked to other agents, I've talked to different lenders, watched a countless amount of videos, whether it's things put on for my brokerage, from the MLS, from CAR itself, other great YouTube videos out there. So let's go ahead and talk about a few scenarios that you might see yourself in when you are looking to buy a home and you're working with a buyer's agent. But before we do, are you liking this content? Do you like any of the videos on my channel? If so, please hit subscribe and like. I'm trying to put videos weekly out as much as I can to help you on your real estate journey wherever you are. So with that said, let's go ahead and get back into the content. So let's go over a few scenarios. So if you're looking to buy a home in 2024 with this whole new ways of working for the real estate agents and for buyers and for sellers, as a buyer. So I think number one, things might just stay the same. You work with a buyer's agent, his compensation is say 2.5%. You love a house that the agent talks to and negotiates with that listing agent, and they say, okay, we will compensate you 2.5% for bringing us a good buyer. So nothing changes, pretty much the same as the past. You don't have to pay that buyer's agent anything, and you just have to pay your down payment, your closing costs, and other fees as far as like appraisal, things like that, inspection, things like that when you are getting your house. So you don't have to worry about this buyer's compensation on that side. So that's good for you as a buyer. I know being a buyer or even a first-time home buyer, trying to gather that amount of money for your down payment and your closing costs is already enough, and now you have to pay the buyer, which could be a whole nother cost in itself, could be a lot. So first scenario, nothing changes. You don't owe your agent anything, and you move forward and get the keys to your new house. So the next scenario is if, say, a seller is not offering compensation for a buyer's agent. And I talked to a lender about that to just try to figure out some scenarios that we can work on that side so that a buyer does not have to pay out of their own pocket for the buyer's compensation. So one scenario that we talked about was adding it into the overall loan amount. So say, for example, the home price is $800,000, and 2.5% of that would be, say, 20 grand. So instead of making an offer for right there at 800, could you go in at 820 grand and then ask for $20,000 to help compensate for the buyer's compensation? That scenario would work. Obviously, the downfall of doing this is that your monthly price would go up. But to kind of think about this, I would say with the way interest rates are right now, about every $10,000 is probably going to be anywhere from $60 to, say, $70 per month. So in this example, if you are going 20 grand over, then that's almost equivalent to, say, it is like $60 per month, because that's $60 per month. So that'd be another $120 per month included into your monthly mortgage price because of that overage that you went through. So obviously you are going to have a higher monthly payment, but you are going to be able to get into the house that you want to get into, and also get that side of compensation covered from the seller's pocket out of the loan, instead of you coming out of your own pocket for that. So definitely a scenario that could potentially come up, and you could talk to your buyer's agent about if the seller is not willing to give compensation to your agent. Another scenario would be maybe the seller is willing to help compensate the buyer for maybe half of his compensation that he's trying to negotiate. So say, for instance, in the example I gave before, the seller is willing to offer 10 grand, but then you would be on the hook for another 10 grand. So you can use two different ways. Maybe you could potentially offer a little bit more to put that in a loan, and then have that 10,000 given to the buyer's agent. You could just come out of pocket with that 10,000 to give to the buyer's agent. Or maybe you could negotiate with the buyer's agent on his overall commission, so that he comes down a bit and takes that 10 grand itself. So you have some options here to be able to work out. This is still very new, and as we go on, I plan on making another video about this, as far as how this worked with some of the buyers that I will be working with in the future when we go through this scenario, to let you know, hey, I had these buyers, it worked out as well as planned. I was able to be compensated from the seller, or maybe another scenario. So I hope to bring you more information onto this. I hope this helps you guys just give a brief overview about what's going on and what to prepare for. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and set up a meeting with me. I have a link down below for a Calendly meeting request, so we can talk about this, maybe strategize, or maybe you're looking to buy a home and just don't know where to get started. I would love to help you out. Feel free to reach out. My information's below. Until next time, take care. Ciao.